Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on your lunch hour for today's Native American Know Your Civil Rights Lunch and Learn webinar. This webinar will cover how the Native American Indigenous people communities can recognize, respond, and report an act of discrimination or bias-based harassment in the workplace, at schools, in housing, and in places of public accommodation. It will cover how to file a complaint and explain the resources that are available to the Native American Indigenous peoples communities. This program will focus on the history of the Native Americans in New Jersey and on the discrimination and harassment their communities have faced. We will have time for Q&A. Please drop your questions in the Q&A tab. And as Tabitha will mention, if you have any technical issues, please communicate your issues through the chat function. Without further ado, I turn it over to our moderator, Community Relations Specialist, Patricia Williamson.
Thank you, Tisha. And before I speak, I would like for us to hear our ground rules and housekeeping from Tabitha Rodriguez. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, we just wanted to go over some ground rules for today's event. This program will be recorded, and given that this is a webinar, guests will not be seen on camera, and audience members will also be muted. We will have a Q&A portion of this webinar, so please feel free to access the Q&A tab here in your Zoom toolbar to ask any questions that you might have for our panelists today. Due to time constraints, we're going to ask that you please keep all questions related to today's topic. And if you have any other questions that we do not get to this afternoon, they may be answered as a follow-up after the event. For any other questions, you could also email us at communityrelations@njcivilrights.gov. If you experience any technical difficulties today, please utilize the chat feature, and we'll try to address any issues you might have in the chat. We also have closed captions enabled for this webinar, so if you need them, you can select Show Captions on your Zoom toolbar, and you'll be able to enable closed captioning. Now I'd like to introduce or pass it back to Patricia Williamson to get us started.
Thank you, Tabitha. Thank you, Tisha. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our Lunch and Learn. This is hosted by the Division on Civil Rights from the Community Relations Unit. My name is Patricia Williamson, and I am a Community Relations Specialist here at the Division on Civil Rights. And we're so happy to have you here to hear more about the Native American background, their story, part of the program objective. In case you missed it earlier, we will be focusing today on the history of the Native Americans in New Jersey and on the discrimination and harassment the Native American community has faced. We'll also cover in this webinar how the Native American and Indigenous peoples can recognize, respond to, and report an act of discrimination or bias-based harassment in the workplace, at schools, in housing, and in places of public accommodation. And then I will cover how to file a complaint and explain the resources that are available to the Native American communities and to all of you here in the state of New Jersey. With that in mind, I would like to begin by introducing our speakers for today. We have two speakers, and the first one is Stephen Burton. He is the chair of the New Jersey Commission on American Indian Affairs. We do have bios for both of our speakers, and we will drop that in the chat. You'll also notice that we will be dropping other information into the chat from time to time. And we will make sure that those things that are dropped will also be something that you will be able to access later on after this webinar is over. So in that case, I just want to come back to Stephen Burton. He is a tribal member of the Ramapo Lenape Nation. He has served as a commissioner on the New Jersey Commission of American Indian Affairs since 2014 and was elected as its chair in 2021. Mr. Burton retired from IBM in 2016 and is now teleworking as an information systems analyst for a major medical firm. He is also an information manager for the Ramapo Lenape Nation. Mr. Burton is a United States Air Force veteran and has traveled throughout Europe and South America. Our second speaker is David Leonardi, and he is a captain, New Jersey State Police, retired, training and outreach liaison, interim state chief resiliency officer, prosecutors supervision and training bureau, and he's under the Office of the Attorney General, Division of Criminal Justice. His bio will also be included in the chat, but just to mention a few things from his bio, in the role that he is currently in, he's responsible for specialized training for law enforcement officers as directed by the Attorney General and the Director of the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice. His duties also include law enforcement and community outreach for the state of New Jersey. And he works with law enforcement and government agencies, as well as community and faith-based organizations in order to enhance community relations on a local and state level. And so I will stop there, and I would love to now start with some questions. Welcome to both of you, but I'd like to start with Mr. Burton. And so let me make sure.
Hello.
Burton, okay.
How are you?
Great, thank you. Good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd like to just start out with a general question so that you can help us with this lunch and learn and help us understand. If you could please describe the history of the Native American and Indigenous tribes in New Jersey.
Okay, that's kind of depending on where you are in New Jersey, it's very different. Speaking for ourselves, the Ramapo, we're in the northern part of New Jersey, part of the Muncie group. We have or had connections, still do. I actually connections in Connecticut, where the Ramapo, there was a Ramapo village in eastern or western Connecticut when the land was sold off. The Ramapo moved in with other family members here in New Jersey. There was other parts of us here, as well as the Pomptons. The Pomptons actually originated from New York also, and then moved over to here. The land that was here was under the premise of Chief Ponus or Sachem Ponus. We didn't have chiefs, we had Sachems. Ponus was pretty much handled most of Western Connecticut, Southern New York, and the northern half of New Jersey. And through his son Tapgow, who was the one who signed off on a lot of the deeds that were here in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. So we have been here since the 1600s, 1640, I think, is when they showed a village on the Connecticut map that showed the Ramapo there. It was a blended tribe. Had Weaskiks were there, and there was a couple other tribes that were tied in together. So it wasn't just a straight group of people. One thing I want to make a note of is that tribes in New Jersey aren't like people think. You're just one distinct group of people. Most of us were roaming people who went to the shore during the summer to feed on shellfish and things like that. And in the winter came back up to the mountains to, harvest animals and crops and things like that. So we're always moving around. And as a result, a lot of the colonials, when they came over, they would see people in a certain grouping and say, oh, you are this or you are that. And many times, a lot of the same people were in those groups. So tribal names aren't really quite a way to describe us, natives in New Jersey. Pretty much they roamed all around. We've had Lenapes, Muncies that came down as far as Trenton. So it's the naming is kind of a misnomer how that works. Anyway, so the Ramapo were here in northern Jersey. They sold a lot of chunk of that land in the 1700s. It was the Schuler patent that sold that. It was sold a couple of times, but Schuler patent was the biggest one. And on that patent that is being held in Hackensack's courthouse, there's actually a picture of it, of the actual deed. It's on animal skin, and it shows a couple of our longhouses between the New York and New Jersey pass. Most of our people had retreated up into the mountains around after that time because of the encroachment of the colonials coming in and pretty much, taking everything over. So they moved up to the mountains, and the mountains weren't that hospitable for a lot of people because it's very rocky. But we were used to it. That was our living. There's a lot of records that speaks of us. For one, there's a Judge Van Vallen in 1900 who wrote about the Ramapo, one of our members who came down from the mountains and used to sell fruits and vegetables and things like that in Oakland. So there's a lot. There's who's the other gentleman I could think of that and people would know, J.F. Pearson, who pretty much had a big mill in the lower part of New York State. He hired a lot of the local people that were there. Also speaks about our family as being big enough to keep the Iroquois away, all the way back up toward Albany. So historically, we've been here, and it seems funny because in this state, actually pretty much everywhere, Native Americans are the only group that has to prove their identity with DNA, which is kind of ludicrous. As you know, people of the back in the old days, people of the African American community, they used to have a thing called the one drop rule. You had one drop, they considered you African American. In Native Americans, it's the opposite way. You could have a one drop and they still consider you not Native American. So it was interesting how they did that.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. And just for all that are here, Mr. Burton is in between here on his actual day job while he's working with us. So occasionally he may need to mute himself as he just did. One of the things that we had a conversation about, and Mr. Burton, I'm sure you can still hear me. We were talking a little bit about the differences between when people consider someone of a certain race and then of a different ethnicity or creed, because a lot of Native Americans and Indigenous people, they may present or look like they are of a specific race, but that's not how you identify yourselves, right, Steve?
Correct. And it's interesting too, because a lot of the old, very beginning when they started actually doing graphical representations of people here, there were wood carvings. And a lot of the wood carvings show that natives were many different colors. We were described as almost looking Nubian in some of our descriptions written about us in the very beginning. So just like any other human, people come in different colors, and so do Native Americans. You don't always have to be, red, as they say, like the Hollywood Indian. They come in many different colors. Also, because over time, as natives, went up capturing people or whatever, they would wind up blending them into the tribe. They became part of the tribe, and that kind of adds to the mix. So anyway, as it is right now with Native Americans, I'm sure, as you know, that we tried to go for federal recognition here in this state, and we were met with some opposition because of the fact of many people in this state are afraid to recognize Native Americans. They're afraid they're going to steal their land, or they're afraid of casinos and all that kind of stuff. And the tribes here in New Jersey are not looking to hurt anybody. We're not trying to take anybody's land. We don't want casinos. We're against casinos, any form of gambling, because look where it's gotten New Jersey so far. So the last thing we want to do is add to that. Most of our rules here have been to protect the resources and protect the people that are here. We have people who work on the groups that work with protecting the Hudson River. We ourselves personally have gotten involved with protecting Liberty State Park from a golf course that's just south of it, trying to steal some of the land so you can put a golf course in there. everything from all kinds of Abbott Farm, which is right outside of Trenton. We were there working with the people there. They were expanding their display of Native American artifacts and things. They wanted to expand their area outside, which happened to be a burial ground. So we worked with them to make sure that the land wasn't disturbed or their burial sites weren't disturbed, so they could complete the task that they wanted and still do it within a graceful way for natives. So we are here presently. The reason why we're still here is because we've learned to adapt over the years. Most of the natives that were here were pretty much forced westward. And I can remember my grandmother who was mentioning about you had to be quiet about who and what you were, because if not, they'd force you to move out west. So a lot of us have learned to adapt. So you may or may not see us on the road in the street and not recognize us for who we are, unless you come to a powwow and then see lots of us there. But yes, we're here, and we're here to do good things like everyone else is in every other group.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. And I truly enjoyed the powwow that I had the opportunity to visit not too long ago. I wanted to ask you, as commissioner of the New Jersey Commission on American Indian Affairs, can you tell us a little bit about that commission and what you and your commissioners do?
Yes, Commissioner of Indian Affairs, we work with the state. We're kind of like the liaison between the nations that are here in New Jersey. And also, if we also have another group, which is not filled right now, but if there are any tribes that are federally or state recognized and they live in New Jersey and they are an actual community here, they can be represented on the commission. And basically what we do is we work with the state on grants, benefits, healthcare, all those kind of things for our citizens. And in turn, we also are kind of like the information for them. Say, for instance, if they're going to be working on a project that may require or may have found some artifacts that were there, we would work with the state and whoever else they have to make sure that those remains are taken care of properly and respectfully. So pretty much that's about what we do. It's we also would do recognition of other nations. If the state comes to us and says, hey, there's a tribe here that says they're from New Jersey, we would get the information from them and then base our report back to the state, and then they would make their determination.
Okay. And could you describe the types of discrimination Native Americans or indigenous tribes have commonly faced?
Oh, sure.
Primarily here, but
primarily in New Jersey. The first one that we have is mascots. We have a lot of schools that still use Native American busts and things like that as mascots. And we have been working with a lot of the schools to have that changed. People kind of look at us like we're some kind of a like a fantasy, and their answers are, when you tell them that we don't find it tasteful, is that they're trying to honor us. That's not a way to honor someone. That's not what they feel is honorable. We in the state, I mean, there are some schools that have some that still have the native names and things, but their whole their image is different now, which is okay. It's just that we don't like the idea of the human like it's not real. You know what I mean? So mascots are one of the biggest things. Curriculum in schools is another. They do not teach Eastern Native American history here. Everything you see is always Western. And they forgot about the whole entire history of what began here, as far as Verrazano and interactions and things like that, Cabot. And so we're working now with the education department, trying to get our history included into school curriculum so that can move forward. As a result of the schools not teaching East Coast Native American history, this is the reason why a lot of people in New Jersey don't believe that Native Americans exist, because they don't hear about it, they don't have exposure to it. And then when you tell them about it, they don't want to believe it. So there's a whole big history that's here in New Jersey that's not even known about. There's been at least 5 wars here, besides the Civil War, not Civil War, but the War of Independence here, that are not spoken about. You have the Pig War, the Beaver War. You have all these different things. Kieff's War, which deals with us directly. I can explain that a little bit to you. But these things are not taught in school. I'll give you a good example. In the 1640s, Governor Kieff was in New Netherlands, New York, and he was trying to get all the native tribes in the area to pay tribute to him. And a lot of us said no. So he decided to send some troops over to Bavonia, which is where near Liberty State Park is. And he had a massacre and killed all the men, women, and children. And they were very graphic about how they did their business. It's written up in history books. And it's something that should be spoken of. It's just as bad as any other war that has been around here locally. And it's not taught, and it should be. So those are the things that we're trying to change here.
Okay. And just so that we have an idea of the magnitude of the population here, can you tell us how many people in New Jersey identify as Native Americans or Indigenous?
Well, there's probably close to 15,000, approximately. I mean, Ramapos are probably near 5,000. There's probably 4,000, 5,000 of Nanticokes, Powhatans, and other indigenous people here who aren't part of the commission or but they still live here in New Jersey. So yeah, it's probably about 15.
Okay, wow. Well, thank you. Don't leave us yet, but I do want to pivot over to Dave Leonardi, and we want to talk a little bit about some of the, based on what you just mentioned in terms of some areas of discrimination, we want to talk about some things in terms of possible incidents and crimes reported in New Jersey. So I'm going to ask Dave Leonardi to come on at this time. Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
And Dave.
Thank you, Patricia.
There you are.
Yeah,
Hi.
Hi.
So I know you have a presentation that you'd like to provide. And before you start, I just wanted to, at first, thank you for coming. And then I also just wanted to, as you mentioned, as you speak in your presentation, where are the most Native American, Indigenous people hate incidents and crimes reported in New Jersey? And if an individual believes that they have been the victim of a bias incident, what options do they have? So within your presentation, if you can touch on those, that would be wonderful.
I will definitely do that. Thank you. And Steve Burton's presentation was very interesting. Most appreciative. So thanks. I'm going to put up I'll put up my PowerPoint. One thing I'll say, Patricia gave me a very gracious introduction. I'm also the Vice President, New Jersey Bias Crimes Officers Association. So just wanted to let you know that as well. And here we go. Okay. Hopefully you can see the PowerPoint. Yes?
Yes.
All right, great. All right, so as Patricia said, I'm Dave Leonardi, Training and Outreach Liaison within the Attorney General's Office, the Division of Criminal Justice. That's part of the Attorney General's Office, as is the Division on Civil Rights. And I work on community outreach and also on training as well. Training law enforcement officers in community relations work. So today we're going to look at what is a bias incident, okay? Actually, a bias incident is an attempted or completed action that's motivated by bigotry and bias regarding a person's real or perceived race, their color, their religion, their gender, their disability, sometimes we forget about, That could be a bias incident as well. If somebody is either mentally or physically disabled, their sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, their national origin or ethnicity. So an incident, a bias incident could be an inappropriate gesture, graffiti. It could be offensive language. So not every bias incident raises to the level of a bias crime. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So the Attorney General a few years ago updated the bias incident investigation standards. Those are the guidelines that police departments and police officers are required to follow whenever they get a call for a bias incident. So those standards are very detailed. They'll go into painstaking detail about what the officer who is responding to a bias incident, even though it may not be a crime, what the steps that the officer should take, steps that the officer's supervisor should take as well. And in some cases where a bias incident raises to a level of a potential bias crime, if you had a situation of, maybe a cross burning on a Black family's front lawn, that doesn't only affect that family, the Black community, but it really affects the entire community because it's a sense of feeling unsafe. So as a result, the Attorney General has a whole section of the standards that steps that a police chief should take to ease the community, try to relieve some tension, and also to give victim assistance when and where needed. So it's very detailed. It's on the Attorney General's website. So if you want to take the time to look at it, you are more than welcome to do that. So bias intimidation is the actual crime, right? 2C:16-1. And the one thing that you have to know about bias intimidation, it never can stand by itself. It has to be accompanied by an adjoining crime. And, it could be a homicide, an assault, aggravated assault, kidnapping, sexual assault, robbery, arson, burglary, harassment, weapons offense. If one of those offenses is committed because of because of bias, because of who that victim is, and they're just trying to get back at the victim because of who he or she may be, that really encompasses bias intimidation. And the one thing that you should know is that whatever the crime, whatever degree that crime is, so if it's a 4th degree assault, let's say, but it was done because of that person's, who that person was, as far as their background, their ethnicity, religion, whatever, one of those 9 protected classes, then that 4th degree crime will go to trial as a 3rd degree crime. So whenever bias intimidation is present, whatever the underlying crime is, it'll be 1 degree higher than what the crime would have been, if that makes sense. In most cases that we see in Jersey, bias intimidation usually involves either assault or harassment in most cases. All right. So you, as the community member that's a victim of a bias incident, what should you report? You always have to remember to be very specific. Report as much detail as you can, as far as what the person looked like, what the person was wearing. If there was a vehicle involved, get the license plate number. And, all of that is going to be important to the officer that responds. And, you have to remember that those details can help and have helped solve other bias incidents. I'm going to talk a little bit in a few minutes about a system that we put in place here in Jersey and how information that comes in from the public, how it's captured and how it's collected and how it helps law enforcement to solve cases. So when an officer responds, the officer will ask exactly what was said verbatim. And you need to say it, even if it was graphic, whatever was said, you need to be able to capture that exactly the way it is. And again, sometimes that can help one department identify somebody from another area, from another town that maybe, or another county, that committed a similar type of offense. So all that's important. This is what the report looks like when an officer responds. This is the supplementary bias incident offense report that gets filled out for every bias incident. So it could be something, as simple as name calling, or, racial slur, an ethnic slur, or religious slur. The officer will fill this form out, and it's very detailed, as you can see. What they do is that report gets filled out, and within 24 hours, under the Attorney General's guidelines, it has to be submitted through the electronic Uniform Crime Reporting System, which goes to New Jersey State Police Uniform Crime Reporting Unit, the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice Bias Crimes Unit, the County Prosecutor's Office where the offense occurred, and the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. All of those agencies, when they receive it, they review it. I can tell you here at the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice, we have 3 analysts that review every bias incident that comes in every day. County Prosecutor's Office does the same, and New Jersey State Police Uniform Crime Reporting takes a very hard look at it. The New Jersey Office of Homeland Security really looks at it for a couple of different reasons, and I'll get to that in a minute. And at the end of every day, at 4:30 every day, a blast email goes out to every bias crime officers in the 21 counties and state agencies, so that all of those bias incident reports that were reported that day will get sent to, every one of the bias crime liaisons throughout the state. They look at it and they can review it, and see if there's a nexus to an incident that occurred maybe in their county. We put this system in place. We've had county prosecutors tell us, that they were able to connect the dots, so to speak, and connect perpetrators that affected different bias incidents along the way. So the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness, they review it to see if there's a potential nexus to terrorism. I can tell you this much, we've had several of those where offenders started with graffiti, maybe a house of worship, synagogue, whatever it may be, and then they elevate it. Can you remember one incident where in Bergen County where it was elevated? 2 individuals started with graffiti, 2 men, on synagogues and Jewish community centers. And then they were never caught, and they elevated to firebombing a rabbi's home when he and his family were sleeping. Fortunately, they all got out okay. So that's why the Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness reviews it to make sure that there's no nexus to an extremist group. They look at it for potential violence to any targeted population. So they look at it too to make sure that there is no particular community, a pattern where maybe a particular community is being targeted. So as you can see, it really gets a very, very comprehensive review. The folks from the Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice, tell us that there is no other system in the country that's as comprehensive as this system. And, from doing this kind of work, I can tell you that seems to be true. So these are the bias incidents reported in New Jersey over the years. Now you could see how they have gone up every year. And part of it, bias incidents continue to occur, particularly during COVID, and particularly after events involving George Floyd's unfortunate death and national events that occurred as a result. Their bias incidents, just continue to rise. But it also, part of it is because, groups like Division on Civil Rights and Division of Criminal Justice, county prosecutors' offices, they do a lot with the community to encourage them to report. And that's really important, to be able to report. Many of these bias incidents are committed by juveniles. We're in the process right now of working with our county prosecutors' offices to train school resource officers, police officers on a local level, and school administrators on a course that would deter school students from getting involved with different bias incidents. The program has been used up in Morris County by the Morris County Prosecutor's Office, and as a result of it, their bias incidents in schools dropped drastically. So, we took a look at it and said we're going to use this program statewide. So these are what some of the numbers are, more of a breakdown, okay, what the numbers look like. By community, by ethnicity, by religion. And you could see that last year, we had a total of 1,985 bias incidents reported in New Jersey. 988 were against the Black community, which is, that's pretty much the way it is. Unfortunately, every year they seem to be the target of the greatest number of bias incidents. When it comes to religion, as you can see with 445 for last year, the Jewish community, and that is, as numbers speak for themselves throughout the years, it pretty much remains the same, followed by the LGBTQ community. They're usually number 3 in numbers. And I know, as Patricia had asked, with Native Americans, the numbers have been very low. 2019, we only had one bias incident reported by a Native American. Same thing is true with 2020, only one bias incident reported. 2022, we actually had 5 reported, so the number kind of jumped up a little bit. And, like the one thing I'll say about reporting, how important it is, I think back several years ago when Jewish Orthodox rabbis were trying to get some members of the Jewish community out of the Ukraine before, or I should say, as there was a disruption within the Ukraine and, the tension between Ukraine and Russia. And the rabbis were collecting donations, and they had flyers and posters, and they got a call from an individual who identified himself as Glenn Fraser Miller, and he came up on their caller ID as such, and he asked the rabbi, "What are you collecting for?" So the rabbi told him, and then the caller, Glenn Fraser Miller, proceeded to berate the rabbi and the Jewish community. I mean, he said some horrendous things. When the rabbi got off the phone, there were several of the rabbis in the room. They could hear what was going on. And they asked, what happened? The rabbi told them. They said, aren't you going to report it? No, we're used to this, number one. And secondly, the police are busy. They have a lot more important things to do. Well, unfortunately, 2 weeks later, that individual, Glenn Fraser Miller, went out was out in Kansas City, and on a Sunday morning went to a Jewish community center, and he shot and killed 4 innocent people. It was a 16-year-old boy, his grandfather, and a mother of 4 kids, and another individual. So That's why you never know what you could prevent, or you never know what is prevented by reporting. And that's why reporting is so important. So lastly, if a bias incident involves a homicide, an arson, an aggravated assault, a sexual assault, if the bias incident was perpetrated by an alleged perpetrator is a suspected law enforcement officer, if the incident occurred by a hate group, or there's a potential for large unscale arrest, every police department knows that they are to report that incident immediately to the Division of Criminal Justice, which is the lead agency when it comes to bias crime investigations, so that the director of Division of Criminal Justice would immediately get notified, and in turn, the Attorney General would be notified. They in turn, if one of these events occurred, they in turn would work with the county prosecutor's office, and particularly with the county prosecutor, to come up with a game plan on how they're going to move forward. So anyway, this is, I'll give you that's my number, but here's the toll-free number. This is the bias crimes hotline, which if there's a bias incident, or obviously if there's a bias crime, we always suggest and recommend that you call your local police department first, so that they come out to the scene and they get all the information firsthand. If for some reason you don't feel comfortable doing that, you could always call any county prosecutor's office, their bias crime folks, or our hotline, which is staffed 24/7. And, we'll have somebody that'll take the call and respond right away. And with that being said, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dave. I'm actually putting some of that into the chat so that people can reach you. I got as far as your office, and so I'll just ask my team to take the rest of what's on that slide before we take it down, so that people will be able to reach you going forward. Thank you so much for that information on the Division on Criminal Justice. We have several questions for both of you. I do want to mention some things from the Division on Civil Rights before we go into that, but one question that's somewhat related, and I just want to highlight it, is in terms of the low numbers in terms of the Native American or Indigenous bias incidents or crimes. We don't necessarily think those numbers are low because things are not happening, based on things that Steve mentioned and also that Dave mentioned, but the reporting is important. And so that is encouraged to, if you see something or know of something, to certainly report it. So with that in mind, I do see we were able to put the bias crimes hotline there. So thank you for that. And I'm going to just mention a few things about the Division on Civil Rights, which is also under the Office of the Attorney General. But we focus on the law against discrimination. And I'm not going to give you a full presentation, but I just wanted to mention that the law against discrimination, we call it the LAD. It prohibits discrimination and bias-based harassment in the areas of employment, housing and real estate, public accommodation, and credit and contracting. And when we talk about protections under the LAD, there are several. There's almost 20 different protected categories. And it's important to note that discrimination can be based on actual or perceived in any of the categories. And so disability, race, color, religion, or creed, the one that we're really focusing on today is the national origin, nationality, or ancestry. And so if you feel that you've been discriminated against in those areas or many of the other ones, which we'll show you on our website in terms of gender or we mentioned age. There's about 20 of them, like I mentioned. We have a system called NJ bias, and I'm going to share my screen so that I can talk to you for a few minutes about that. Just to give a brief overview about our New Jersey Bias Investigation Access System. This is what our screen will look like, and this is how you can file a complaint in the civil rights space. So in terms of filing a complaint with DCR, the Division on Civil Rights, you must first submit an intake form, and you can submit the intake form in multiple ways. The first way is online by creating an account and using the NJ Bias Investigation Access System, NJ Bias, and the website is https://bias.njcivilrights.gov. The second way is by calling 1-833-NJ-DCR for you, or you can also call the housing hotline, which is 1-866-405-3050, and ask a DCR receptionist to assist you in filling out the form on NJ Bias. Retaliation is prohibited, and the statute of limitations is 180 days for the LAD, for fair chance in housing. And we are, oh, I'm sorry. I moved it. Let me keep continuing on, but with the Family Leave Act was the third one. To file a complaint, these are two screenshots that show how your screen should look when you're filing a complaint. So on the left-hand side, you'll see this screen when you first come, and you'll see the first 5 icons are all for the Division on Civil Rights. The 6th icon, which is underneath all of them, is the bias crime complaint, New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice, which is what Dave Leonardi represents. So the ones I'm talking about are the ones up top: housing, in terms of criminal background or housing, And then the other 3 are employment, the New Jersey Family Leave Act, or place of public accommodation. All of those are under the law against discrimination. Once you click on one of the top 5 icons, you move over to the right screen. And in terms of filing for step-by-step instructions, you can click on the appropriate user manual. We have them in both English and Spanish. We have the NJ Bias manual, and it's for one side is for complainants and the other side is for respondents. And after that, at this bottom area here, you can also create your account at that point. And very briefly, just in terms of the process, the constituent, which would be you, can schedule an intake interview with a DCR investigator. And during that interview, the investigator will ask questions to find out whether DCR has jurisdiction over that complaint, whether it's within 180 days, and whether it alleges a violation of the law against discrimination. If it does, DCR will prepare a verified complaint form for signature. And once you as a constituent signs the verified complaint, you're known as the complainant. Then DCR will serve the verified complaint on the respondent, and that's the party that may have violated the complainant's civil rights. The respondent has a chance to respond with its version of events. And then this goes into the DCR investigations process, which may include interviews with the complainant, respondent, and witnesses, and a review of all relevant documents, photos, and video recordings. At the end of the investigation, if the parties have not already reached a mutually agreeable resolution of the complaint, DCR will determine whether there is probable cause to believe a violation of the LAD occurred. If DCR believes it did occur, it will prosecute the violation in court or the Office of Administrative Law. At the conclusion of a case, DCR can order money damages to the victim and equitable relief. Okay, so I'll stop here. We do have several trainings, and that's something that's showing there. But what I wanted to do at this point was just mention those things as different options so that if you do decide to report some of the things that you're seeing, such as, and I'll just give a general example in terms of the Native American or Indigenous peoples, if they are wearing traditional garments or having their hair in a certain style, perhaps a braid or something of that nature, and someone discriminates against them because of how they're dressed or how they're wearing their hair. Those are items that will fall under the law against discrimination, particularly in the area of creed, ancestry, ethnicity, and it's actual or perceived. So even if someone who may not be a Native American, if they are wearing that and someone says something that is discriminatory towards them, that is still considered something that you can consider under the LAD. So with that in mind, I would now like to start the question and answer. So if Steve and Dave, if you can come back on screen with me, I have some questions for both of you. I can see now already with the amount of people that have sent in questions. Thank you for having all of the questions. All of them will not get answered today. I will answer them primarily in the order that they were received, but also those that are most specific to this particular topic of Native Americans and awareness there. Steve, are you able to join us? And if Steve's not able.
Yes, I am. Sorry,
Okay.
my thing isn't fast enough.
No, wonderful. I wanted to start with you because there's several questions for you. There's a few questions for you as well, Dave, but I'm going to start with you. And Steve, the first question that I have, can you tell us a general, what is the thought behind when people or organizations mention a land acknowledgement at the beginning of their presentations, or perhaps have it on their email address, signature? Is that complimentary, or how is that taken by the actual community?
That's a good question. Land acknowledgements are, we've done a few land acknowledgements for institutions like Princeton and places like that, and they'll put a plaque up.
I guess I should say, can you define what one is for those that may not know? I forgot to do that.
But basically, it's just they have a little ceremony stating who owned the land before them. They acknowledge that it was Lenape territory, and a lot of us feel that it's okay to do that, but it really doesn't mean as much as it should. Acknowledging who owns the land, yet denying who the people are now who are here, destroying the land and just polluting, dumping. Is it really acknowledging the land? It's not. The Native people that were here before that, we consider the land part of us, and we're part of it. So to acknowledge the land is to acknowledge the people. And when places say, yeah, we recognize that this was your land before, but don't teach anybody about us, like some of the institutions don't do, or some of the businesses that say, yeah, we recognize the land, but they'll destroy it and throw in parking lots and buildings and all kinds of stuff. It's not really acknowledging anything. It's just almost like it feels like I want to free myself and make myself feel good about something by saying this and getting it out of the way. Now I won't feel guilty about what I do. So, like I said, some of us like the fact of land acknowledgements. Some of us are kind of little, show me that you're really acknowledging the land by acknowledging the people who live there and by protecting the places that you consider, what you're taking over.
Thank you, Steve. The next question is also for you. This is from Rachel. When you say you must have DNA to prove indigenous or native status, do people have to go get an actual DNA test? Why would someone on either side, the government or the people, want this? What is the purpose?
Okay, this is kind of a loaded question. This goes back to the 1800s, 1700s, the BIA. The whole purpose of the BIA was to eradicate Native Americans here. That was their main focus. And their way was either we destroy the Native Americans or we breed them out. And it says so right in their book how they wanted to get rid of all of us. And I have one of the books on my library actually about the BIA. So as I said, in society is right now, especially East Coast, people don't believe that Native Americans are here. They think that we were all migrated out west and none exist on the East Coast. So when you tell somebody that you are Native, the first thing out of their mouth is well, prove it. Well, it's like saying, how do you prove you're Italian American? Well, I have family with this thing. Okay, well, so do I. But that's still not good enough. So they want to see DNA proof like that could prove anything. DNA doesn't prove anything, really. You may have Native American blood, but it doesn't tell you what tribe you belong to, what nation you belong to. All it basically says is that you're from North America. If you happen to have two of the HALOPs that says that you're a Native American strain, well, I guess that's good, but it just wouldn't end there. It's not the fact that people want to know if you really have the blood in order to treat you that way. It's just another obstacle to deny you. So even if you had and given them the DNA proof, which nobody will do that, they'd find some other excuse. So, but that's how it is. Natives are the only group that has to prove who they are. And that was by design by the BIA.
Thank you. Valerie asks, does the Commission on American Indian Affairs have copies of the deeds that you mentioned? And if so, who do we contact for copies if available?
Well, we have a lot of the deeds. For instance, the one I mentioned about the Schuler patent, I have a copy of that deed. And we have been collecting deeds slowly, making copies of them. We actually have one of the original deeds for one of the lands that were sold. That was the Pot Hat Tract. We received that last year from the original family that bought the land from us. They returned the original deed back to us, and now it's in a museum in New York that we hold on to it. But yes, we have been slowly going through trying to find a lot of these deeds and get copies of them and have the names and things on them. Usually the first place you go is to the state library. They may have them. It's a lot of research trying to find them all, to be honest. For instance, the Treaty of Easton, there was 3 treaties of Easton, trying to find a copy of those. You would think the state of Pennsylvania would have one, but they do not. There were 6 of those created. We happened to see one that was on sale on Christie's for an undisclosed amount that went to an undisclosed bidder. It was an original copy of the deed. Nobody else seems to have one, which is very interesting how deeds get from government facilities into private hands. No.
Dave, this next question is for you. In terms of bias incident reporting, what checks are in place to make sure this happens and that it is not just filed as an information report?
Well, that's a really good question. And, it goes back to the reporting system. As I mentioned before, once that police department reports the bias incident, the detectives and assistant prosecutors from that county where the incident took place will review it. And reading the report, if the report seems like there may be more to it, if the detective or the assistant prosecutor has questions, they'll reach out to that police department to be able to make sure that those questions get answered. in some cases, as I mentioned before, our office and Homeland Security reviews it as well. And there's been times when it gets reviewed by our office, even our chief of detectives here at Division of Criminal Justice, he'll review everyone because he gets them as well as I do. And if there's a question, if something looks like it needs to be followed up, they're right on the phone with the county folks, who in turn will be right on the phone with the local police department to make sure that we get those answers. So every bias incident gets scrutinized pretty well every day.
Thank you. I'm going to ask another question. Reverend,
There we go.
okay. Reverend Jan asks, first, this is for you, Steve. Can you talk more about the treaties in northern New Jersey, Bergen County, that sold off native lands? You're muted, Steve. Steve, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, one of the lands in Bergen County, that was the Schuler patent that was sold at 1700. It's now housed in a government facility, the actual one, on animal skin. I have copies of it, and I also have a copy of it online. That bit of land for Bergen County was actually sold a couple of times. The first time it was sold, well, let's go back even before that. When land was first sold here, it was at the discretion of the King of England. And if they didn't approve of the sale of land, it went back to the tribes. As we would say, there was no actual proof of the land being sold. So there was a point where anybody who bought land, you had to have approval first from Europe before you actually could own the land. And it was actually kind of like a lease where you had the land, and as long as you worked it and paid, you're good. If you didn't pay, they took it back. But the Schuler patent was the last time the land was sold. And it pretty much covered all of most of Bergen County, part of Passaic County. It was called the Ramapo Tract. Like I said, we have copies of that, and it does show on there where the villages were in the area. It shows the two longhouses that were at the point of the mountain between New York and New Jersey.
Questions and comments keep coming in. I'm going back and forth between Q&A and the chat. This is a comment from Heather Hadley. Thank you for your presentations. As a member of the Eastern Pequot Tribal Nation of Connecticut and living and raising a son in New Jersey, I found it is very important that history of Eastern tribes is not only important, but essential. We need more discussion. Thank you, Heather. I'm gonna skip over here to Marcella. Has there been any efforts in the Ramapo area educating teachers on the Indigenous students they serve? I've heard horrible things come out of the teachers' mouths regarding students of the Native American descent that are aligned with all the untruths and derogatory names used regarding the community. So I guess the question is, have there been any efforts in the Ramapo area of educating the teachers on Indigenous students they serve? I know you mentioned that a little bit, Steve.
Yes. Yeah, there is. And right now there's an ongoing, we work with a lot of the colleges. We work with Ramapo College, we work with Montclair College, we work with Rutgers College. We also have done some work with one of the elementary schools in Malwa on that. And also the commission is working with Claire Garland, who's in the commission with us, working on doing a curriculum that can be hopefully rolled out to the state and the Board of Education to start teaching all of our history in East Coast and New Jersey.
Lorraine Hunter Hoylian says, my children are members of the Chickasaw Nation. They have CDIB cards and are active in the tribe. We did have to prove lineage, but have not had to get DNA tests. Is this something that we will have to do?
No, see, between tribal members, for instance, ours, most of everyone's, you have to have a certain amount of, well, most tribes go by your mother and father, your matrilineal and patrilineal descent. The blood part comes in for the government. If you want to be recognized by the government, you have to have a certain amount of blood quantum for them to consider you a tribal member. But really, that's up to the tribe to decide who is and who isn't. The government can't tell a tribe, you know, this is a member, this is not. So if your tribal, your genealogy group recognizes you as a tribal member and you have a tribal card, that's as far as you really have to go. It's really not up to anybody else to decide who you are and who you're not. That's on them, not you.
Okay. I have time for two more. One is a comment, and I think another one may be a question. Actually, I'll answer this question because, let's see. Oh boy, they're coming in. Okay, well, this one, I just want to acknowledge this one. How many people who work for DCR and DOJ identify as Native American? I do not know the answer to that from DCR's perspective. And DOJ is federal, so I'm not sure, perhaps she meant DCJ. But that's something we can perhaps find out for reporting at a later time. The comment from Claire, I have a list of all the land transfers between Native people and settlers in New Jersey from Princeton University. Also, there are 800 deeds in the state archives vault in the basement at the State Department. And the last one that I will take here is from Tyrese Gould Jacinto. The real issue is the fact that the indigenous people had no concept of owning land, and it is a reasonable conclusion that the traded items that took place in the 1600s to 1700s in lieu of land purchase were looked at as gifts to the indigenous, not as a sale. So thank you, Tyrese. And I'm going to have to leave it there. So we have a lot of questions, a lot of comments, and I thank you so much for all of them. We do have ways of taking these and keeping them with us so that hopefully we can get back to you on them. Let me move this here. Okay. So what I'd like to do in the last few minutes, I first want to thank both Steve Burton and Dave Leonardi for their time, and sharing their knowledge of their respective areas. I've learned so much myself, and I found this very interesting. I hope those of you that were here today and will hear this recording later will also find it similarly interesting. We've learned a lot. We have a lot of work to do, and we certainly hope that others will be able to help and see that, yes, Native Americans and Indigenous peoples are here. They're here in New Jersey, and they're here today. They're not of the past. They are here in the present. And so I think that's very important. If you don't have anything else from today, just to know that that's important, that they're here. And then the other portion is that if you have any level of discrimination against you, to please make sure that you report that so that we can start the process in terms of the protections and things of that nature so that they don't go unnoticed or invisible. So again, thank you, Steve and Dave. I'd also like to thank the members of my community relations unit, my director, Tisha Leonardo Santiago, Kai Durant, Fanny Chan Jarvis, and Tabitha Rodriguez, who's with us for technology purposes. And I'd like to thank all of you that are here and continuing to still put in comments and questions. We really appreciate your enthusiasm, and I hope you had a lot to, this is a lunch and learn. And so whereas maybe you did not eat food, I hope you got a lot of food for thought. So with that, I say thank you. Have a great rest of the day and the rest of February is the last day of Black History Month. So happy Black History Month to you as well. Take care, everybody.